Hello, friend, and welcome to the U-Turn podcast. This is the absolute place for you if you are ready to create a business, a career, a personal brand, or just a life that you are so proud of. And every single week, I'll be bringing you PhDs, subject matter experts, psychology practitioners, business leaders, all onto the show to elevate your success in your work and also your life, so that you can leave a legacy, you can amplify your authority, and you can really skyrocket the amount of opportunities that you are creating for yourself in your career, whether you're in corporate or you're a business owner. My name is Ashley Stahl. I'm an international best-selling author of the book U-Turn: Get Unstuck, Discover Your Direction, and Design Your Dream Career. And most importantly, I'm the CEO of Wise Whisper Agency. I'm a top 100 TEDx speaker on the internet, and it inspired me to start Wise Whisper because my company now has a completely done-for-you process to get your signature talk written and booked on stage. In fact, we've written more than 100 TEDx talks, and we've placed more than 100 clients on stage as speakers for TEDx events. And now I'm on a mission to help every change maker that I know impact millions and share their story. So right now, I'm excited to bring you right into this week's episode. All right, U-Turn friends, obviously no day on the show is the same, and I need that for my little wild mind that needs stimulation. And so today, prepare to be stimulated. We have Dave Rubin on the show. He's the host of the Rubin Report, a top-ranking talk show with over 1 billion views, millions of subscribers. Rubin Report is recognized as one of the most influential spaces for uncensored conversations about politics, culture, comedy, current events, and more. Rubin began his career in New York City as a stand-up comedian. I'm already curious to ask him if he performed at Comedy Cellar, which I spent all my time at.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I think I was the youngest comic ever passed at Comedy Cellar. We can get to that.
Awesome. See, this is why this is so fruitful. And you also, and for those of you who don't know Dave, he continues to perform throughout the United States and Europe using his voice to really illuminate the absurdities of our culture's polarized political landscape. He accompanied Dr. Jordan B. Peterson on an international speaking tour where they addressed hundreds of thousands of people across 3 continents. And in an effort to combat tech censorship, he founded locals.com, which is a subscription-based digital platform that allows creators to be independent by giving them control over their content and their data. Locals.com has amassed tens of millions of users since its inception in 2019, and he sold the platform to Rumble in 2021, which went public in 2022. He's also a 2-time New York Times best-selling author, which you all know, Wise Whisper Agency. We have so many books we're ghostwriting right now, so many speeches we're ghostwriting right now. I know what it takes to write a book that hits New York Times. So I salute you, Dave. It's really nice to be here with you.
Well, I actually wrote my books, no offense to ghostwriters, but I did write my books. My second book, I had someone that helped me very intensely because it was much more research-based than my first one.
Yeah.
And that really is not a shot to ghostwriters at all because, you know, for all these people that write books and public people in politics or media or whatever, the idea that you could really sit down, even if you're like absolutely brilliant, that you would have the time and discipline and everything else to formulate that into a 200-page book is really, really tough. But I loved, particularly my first book, which came out in 2020. Unfortunately, my whole tour got canceled because of COVID. I loved writing that book. I loved just like starting my day with a cup of coffee, locking myself in a room. And literally there were days that from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., I did not leave except to go to the bathroom, and I would forget to eat. And I would and sometimes, sometimes you just sit there for 3 hours and you can't type a single letter. And then for suddenly 45 minutes, you can't stop. And I really, really loved it. I had no idea when I got the deal whether I was going to be able to do it or not. The second book, which I really loved as well in terms of the content of the book, was more of a slog because it was a little more research-based, as I said. And perhaps there will be a third if I ever get some time one of these days, maybe.
You know, I love listening to you talk about book writing, and it's funny, people used to ask me when I wrote my book, do you have a creative process? And I'd be like, no, I don't think so. And my boyfriend at the time, he was like, what are you talking about? You put the air at 65, you wear the same sweat outfit, and it's dark, and you have candles and the same music playing.
Yeah.
actually, the band that I listen to is live in LA tonight. I'm going to see Tycho.
Oh yeah, we
I
know
just
Tycho around
love
here.
it.
I've got some LPs of Tycho. Yeah, they put them out on record too. I like a lot of that kind of chill ambient
Helpful for writing,
situation.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, I so relate to what you're saying, where you just go up to go to the bathroom. Honestly, there were times, I swear, writing this book, I was like, maybe I should just be wearing a diaper because I don't even want to get
Yeah.
up. I'm in such a creative state.
Well,
So
that's what it is. If you're really trying, especially if you're really in it. I guess if you're writing a history book, and I'm not knocking any discipline or anything else, but if you're writing something very, very technical, there's a certain brain space for it. If you're writing something that's either kind of very personal or philosophical, or my first book, Don't Burn This Book, was a part biography, autobiography, and then part political adventure. And to weave that in and out in an interesting narrative way without it just being like, this happened on this day and this happened the next day and everything else. That was the challenging part for me. And then you write it and you're
yeah,
like, wow, I just gave birth to this baby. Let's see if
yeah,
anyone likes this kid.
yeah. People have a little hangover from it too, because
Yeah.
my agency, we've booked more than 100 people on stage for TEDx specifically, but a lot of different stages. And it's been really interesting to see what people go through, the anxiety that they have when their book is done, whether they've had a ghostwriter or just creative help. But as I'm listening to you talk, it's interesting. Part of me wants to say, oh, you were just on a 30-day digital detox. Your team told me. I want to hear about that. But
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
actually I'm feeling even more pulled into right now is how bold you've been in your career and how often you probably have had to get compliance emails from God knows who. And unlike you, well, maybe I am like you, but I live in such fear of that. I'm such a rule follower, Dave. Like, it's actually painful. Like, if I had a middle seat on an airplane and the airplane was empty, I would stay in my back middle seat. That's how lame I am.
Yeah.
I think it's just anxiety of breaking the rules. I have this anxiety of getting in trouble. And I used to work in counterterrorism at the Pentagon back during the Obama administration. And I don't know what drew me into that as a early 20 something, right? It was just like justice, integrity, rules. And obviously the rules aren't always rooted in actual integrity or sense, right? So I can understand that. But I guess the thing I'm most curious about is, how do you stay sane in a world where you have so many eyeballs on you and so many opinions about you? Like, how do you not let that hit your self-esteem every now and again in a way that really hurts your life?
It's funny. I saw just like a 10-second clip this morning of Donald Trump on Lex Friedman's podcast. And Lex asked him something about care, what people say about you all the time. They're so mean, blah, blah, blah. And Trump was like, you know what? You just have to not care. It's as simple as that. And I
Yeah.
think that that's kind of right, but it's much easier said than done, of course. When I started doing this the first couple of years, so I started the original version of the Rubin Report, and I was a big lefty, progressive, the whole thing, and I was on the Young Turks Network. That's when the show started, and for the most part, I just got love. I was kind of like a standard lefty, saying the standard lefty talking points, and it was a lot of love for the first year and a half or so. Then when I started to wake up and ask some questions a little bit differently and start making a distinction between classical liberalism and what I think the left had become, which now has become extremely obvious for those of your listeners that pay attention to politics, just sort of how radical the progressive wing has become in contrast to kind of an old school liberal. Then I started getting a crazy amount of hate, and I couldn't believe it, not because I was getting hate, but the hate was coming from the people that I thought were the good guys.
Yeah.
So it was like, it was a little jarring to suddenly wake up and my Twitter feed and YouTube comments are all terrible. Not all terrible, but let's say disproportionately bad from what they were before. But it was also coming from what I thought were my people. And I internalized a lot of that stress. I actually wrote about this in the first book, but in 2015, late 2015 into early 2016, because of the stress, I didn't realize how stressed I was. I actually developed alopecia areata, which is where you lose huge chunks of your hair, like quarter or 2/4 size chunks of your hair. I lost probably good 40% of my hair. I went
Wow.
on crazy experimental medication. And that was one of the moments that made me realize, boy, if I'm going to do this, first I got to get healthy. I got to get right, de-stress, change my diet a little bit. I started doing PRP. We can talk about that more if you want, but otherwise we can leave
Yeah.
it there. But I did a few things to shift my mental state, most importantly. And then really, as my career kind of grew, I don't care as much. So it's like, it's not that I care about my career deeply and I care about the things that I talk about deeply, but when I was starting to grow, people used to make up things. Like I was always angry when somebody, I would, Mediaite or Huffington Post or Daily Beast, Dave Rubin, blah, 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 and they would literally leave out the word not, or they would just leave out the next sentence, or all the games that they play, right? Or I would be interviewed by Vanity Fair and for 4 hours and they would take one sentence, like all of that nonsense. Der Spiegel, the largest magazine in all of Germany, put me on the cover, a picture of me, cover, where I'm sitting on a couch in my house. My arms are out like this with a big American flag behind me. And they called me, what was it? It was the darling of the alt-right or the most television-friendly person of the alt-right, like just crazy nonsense. But anyway, over time, when you've been through all of that enough, the lies, the drivel, the manipulations, at some point, I guess if you're successful, you're like, you know what? I survived. I'm successful. I built a nice business here. And then all of that starts becoming fuel rather than becoming, water on the flame, let's say, something like that. So in retrospect, I'm kind of happy that I went through a lot of that stuff. That's not to say that every now and again I see a comment and I'm like, God, or somebody that I used to know will turn on me, or, somebody that I helped will say something bad about me. And that's kind of annoying. But I think basically Trump is kind of right about that. You just can't worry about it that much.
Yeah, wow. I back in 2014, 15, when coaching wasn't that trendy, I started my business like 2013, which I don't coach anymore, but I scaled an online course. It was like when webinars were like a new thing and coaches were like a new thing. And it was like right when Facebook ads began. And I remember I ended up spending $2.5 million on Facebook ads once I figured out my course. Yeah.
Damn.
And what I learned, well, number one, I bought 515,000 subscribers. So I bought an entire audience in 2 months, which was crazy because I was like 25 and didn't really understand funnels or business. And now here I am later in my late 30s, like mostly we're doing books and speeches, but people sometimes come to me for a webinar script of all things, which is like blast from the bowels of my actual past. I'm like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
But what I learned buying 500,000 subscribers in 2 months was that there's what I like to call a TCR, troll conversion rate. Like 0.01% of people are just going to think you suck and they're so loud. And I know that we live in a world in personal development where they talk about like, well, is there anything like, I always like the 3-star people, like the 1-star people that are just so pissed. You're like, I don't even know if you're sane. The five-star people, thank you. The 3-star, I'm like, okay, maybe they're saying something I can learn from. But it
Yes.
is hard to keep yourself open when the world is just such a free for all. So
Right.
yeah, just any thoughts on how you were able to do that?
Well, I think categorizing it like you just did is a really good way of looking at it, because if you're going to be in the game of doing anything publicly, of course, you're going to get accolades for it if it takes off, and you're going to get a lot of hate.
Yeah.
You also have to remember one of the ways, not only is sort of ranking the hate or the haters is kind of important, because you're right. If let's say I do somebody else's show, I'm just going to name anyone. It doesn't matter. I do Adam Carolla's show, right? And I'm on with Adam, and I look at some comments, and a couple of comments are just like, Dave's just a soul or blah, blah, blah. Okay, you disregard those. It's meaningless, right? Now, someone might be like, at minute 15, Dave said that he thought this about the other thing. It's like, well, you don't want to completely disregard everybody just because there are a lot of trolls online. But you're right. It becomes harder to do because the online conversation has devolved in the weird way it is. What I always try to remind people is this, that if a video on YouTube gets 1 million views, a 1 million view video might have, I don't know, 2,000 comments, let's say, because it's a tiny percentage of people that actually comment. So you automatically have to know, boy, that means that about 990,000 people, more than that probably watched, either enjoyed it or didn't, but moved on with their day. There is a very small sliver of people who have the psychological makeup of people that do comment on these things. So and then within that, there are the people who are kind of nice, there are people who are thoughtful, and then there's the awful trolls and everything else, and there's the bots and the rest of it. So you're throwing yourself into this pool where you really don't know what's real and what isn't. So ultimately, I think the only way to escape it and still be okay on the other side is to not pay that much attention. What you should pay attention to are the people around you. You should pay attention to your employees and your producers and, that's not to completely dismiss my fans at all. I love, you know, if I'm at Whole Foods or something and someone comes up to me and says this, that, or the other thing, every now and again, they'll be like, Dave, you said this thing and I didn't agree. And I love that. I love that. I'm like, oh, cool. You watched, you disagreed, and now you approached me in a pleasant way. Like, what's better than that? But if you're just in that tiny little space of the comments and the replies, you will end up in a mental institution.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because your body gave you feedback. I feel like you're in a parallel universe with my partner. He has a venture fund, but he's very into politics, and he went to law school at Stanford, and he got a little alopecia. So it's like his
Oh,
body,
wow.
and it came out of nowhere. And so it's like his body was giving him the little stress signal. At first he got a haircut, and I was like, hey, he totally like shaved off a spot. Like, what the heck? Your haircut's gone
Yeah.
wild. And then we figured it out. So he's been tending to that. And it's been like a whole little thing that he's been taking care of. I have more cell phone videos than I'd like to admit with a flashlight on his like little spot. And
Yeah.
thankfully he's getting ahead of it. But I think a lot of people, their body shows stress. And so when I think about you and all the success you've had, it's like some people put themselves out there and they get met by the universe. Some people put themselves out there and they don't. And maybe they're putting in the same amount of work and they just don't get met. So I like to think of myself, you know, if I don't say so myself, I'm pretty personable, I'm pretty smart, and my podcast has 4 million downloads. You have billions of people who've listened to your show. Like, I have friends like that where their show is like in the top 10 on all of Apple Podcasts, really good friends. And I'm like, what are you guys up to with that? And they're like, nothing. We're just chatting. Like, it just
Yeah.
gets follows. And so I would love to deconstruct a little bit of those sweet spot moments in your history where if you really look back in time, because I think it's really powerful. We all have little shifting points where if you keep putting yourself out there long enough, something's going to move. What were those for you? Like, and particularly, are there any that you could reconstruct, right? Because a lot of the time it's luck, but
Yeah.
sometimes you're doing something that you're creating that luck.
Yeah. Well, first, real quick, let me just say that if your husband is still dealing with the alopecia thing, definitely try PRP, you know, platelet-rich plasma, where they take your blood out and spin it and put the plasma back in you. I think that really helped. Also, I think getting off a lot of sugars and carbs really helped. I do largely a carnivore diet now, not completely at all. I still eat some chicken here and there. I eat eggs. Like, I'm not just eating a steak every meal, but I think really removing sugar more than anything else really did help. And then really the stress thing, because if, you know, I went in for blood work because I was like, I don't know, do I have cancer? Like, what's going on here? My blood work all came back fine. So it's like, all right, what can you do if they can't point to something and be like, oh, it's this lipid and this, whatever, what can you do? Well, you could try to de-stress yourself. You could try to maybe spend a little less time scrolling on this thing and all the rest of it. Anyway, to answer that question, I think, you know, most of those points, and I do have a few of them that I think were extremely, now in retrospect, obviously formative moments. I think the real secret behind that for me was that as I kind of woke up politically to what I thought was going on in the world, and again, I was a lefty, and I was just kind of waking up to what now most people see with a very radical left. I actually don't know enough about your politics to know if you even agree with that, other than you're having me on the show. So I suspect we're not in wild disagreement, let's say. But I think what happened was, as I woke up, I just started talking about it. Here's what I'm thinking, guys. I don't know. Why are we trying to silence people? We're supposed to be the liberals. I was every day on the show, you could actually track, oh, I was waking up to this and waking up to that. And the thing is, once the dam breaks, you can't stop it. You can't put a wave back in a cup. And then I started thinking about other things. I thought, wow, if this is wrong, then have I been wrong about other things? Maybe I have been wrong about taxation or this or that or whatever it might be. But I can give you the one formative moment that everyone points to with me, that people mention to me more than anything else, is that when I was still mostly a lefty, but I was definitely waking up to a lot of this, I had Larry Elder on the show. Larry Elder is, he happens to be Black, but he's really a libertarian, thought of as a conservative. He ran, you may remember 2-3 years ago now, he ran for governor against Newsom in the recall in California. I ended up opening for him on the road for some of that stuff, which was amazing, because in about 2016, I had him on the show. Again, I'm a lefty at the time. He's a very outspoken, you know, Black conservative. And we got into it about systemic racism and all this stuff. And he just beat me senseless with facts over and over and over again.
Wow.
And kept, when I asked him questions, he would turn it on me and I didn't have the appropriate answers. And here's the part that you're going to find most interesting is that it's not that I wasn't ready and that was then became obvious. The true goodness of what I did there was not something I thought about. It wasn't just, oh, I'm going to sit down with this guy and see what happens. We did not air that live. I was at Aura TV at the time, which was Larry King's digital network. We had a big staff. I don't know, there's probably 20 people in the control room. When the show ended, I walked in there and the producer came up to me and he's like, Dave, don't worry about that. We'll cut that 20 minutes. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, that was real. Like, if we cut that, how can I call myself an interviewer? How can I tell people I'm trying to do something true if we cut that? And we put it up unedited. And the next day, it got clipped across the internet a million ways. And it was black conservative destroys white libtard and all the headlines. And it's been seen hundreds of millions of times. But it was a moment that not only, I always tell people it's my best and worst career moment at the exact same time. It was my worst moment for obvious reasons. I got into an intellectual fight without being prepared. So very obviously my worst moment. It's my best moment because after I did the right thing, and by doing the right thing, not editing it, letting the truth be out there, then it opened up a whole new world.
I love that. One thing I think about, I've been running and building my dream team, and I'm working with some of the smartest people I have ever met. I identify as a great writer, and I look at these people, I'm like, I think you guys are better than me. And that's such a cool
That's
feeling.
great. That's great.
It's a very cool feeling. Our creative director wrote speeches for Steve Jobs' executive team. We've got people from some of my favorite TV shows growing up. But as I'm listening to you talk about, getting people's feedback all over the internet, 100 million, to the tune of 100 million times, like hit over the head over and over in the best way, right? You wake up to it. But I think about team leadership. Like, how do you lead people? How do you show up in the world when you quote unquote make a mistake? And it's not to say that your political beliefs before were any sort of mistake, but I think we live in a world where people get defensive really quickly and they try to maybe fix a problem, but their defensiveness is so loud for people, the energy of that. And I've really started to buy into the belief that the way to win people over is to just take a full second shot and do better or believe better or show up better versus try to deny or contort the failed first shot. We haven't had many unhappy customers, for example, but we have one that came to mind that was just a little bit of a project client. And, like they just weren't easily made happy. And eventually I was like, you know what, let's stop fixing this project. And for my own piece, let's just take a full new shot at it. And it went so much better. And so when you got that feedback, obviously you're having a reckoning on your own political beliefs and in the middle of that conversation. And I think that's part of the human experiences is, with every new version of you, an old version of you is kind of dying. Like, oh, I used to think this. For me, politically, I think I'm permanently hungover by politics, like just working national security on Afghanistan, in the Department of Defense long enough, just kind of killed me a little bit. So ever since I went into entrepreneurship since like 2013, I've been like very lightly politically aware. I know enough to know what's going on, but not enough to tell myself I have an opinion. Part of that is because working so closely in politics, and I was just telling my partner this the other day, I was telling him how, when somebody is running for office, they don't necessarily have a level of security clearance to see all the information in front of them of what they're actually working with in the administration. So that's something that I always got really, I don't want to say perplexed by, but I thought about a lot from a political perspective where I'm like, people are campaigning and they're making these promises, but they don't actually know the full scope of information.
Right. They don't know what they don't know.
They don't know what they don't know. And there's probably, based on my own security clearance, which is not active anymore, obviously, but I just remember seeing things come across my desk thinking like, that's a really big piece of information that people don't know. And so I think that's what got me out of politics in short is like, oh man, there's too much I don't know. I feel scared to even say I know anything. And I think that's actually a trademark of a smart person is you can contribute to what you believe, but knowing that there's always so much more. And it seems like that's what happened for you in that conversation. So it seems like you let yourself be burned and that served you in some way that got you in front. How did you switch your reputation? How did you move over?
Yeah, well, really what happened after that, again, it was not calculating. And I think that that's what people appreciate because it was me doing what I thought was the right thing very obviously. And people saw that authenticity. I did not sit down and be like, this is how we're going to do it.
Right.
It was really just that, waking up every day being like, this is what I'm thinking, and I'm just going to start saying it and talking to people. So really what happened from that moment was I had Larry Elder on the show, and then I was like, you know what? I enjoyed that conversation. I'm waking up a little bit, let's say. I'll talk to Ben Shapiro. I'll talk to Dennis Prager. I'll talk to Glenn Beck. You know, the list goes on and on and on. A lot of these guys have now become friends and colleagues, and I ended up touring with Jordan Peterson and all the rest of it. But what I found largely was not always that I was like blown away by their political ideas. A lot of them, I still don't agree with a lot of them. I actually consider myself a classical liberal still, which is just a very hard thing to define in America these days because the word liberal has been so mangled, unfortunately. But what I was more interested in with them was even for whatever we disagreed on. So for example, I consider myself begrudgingly pro-choice, and I was talking to a lot of conservatives who are pro-life.
Mhm.
Well, what I found was they were always willing to have the conversation, not attack me for it, agree to disagree, and be kind and generous of spirit and everything else. And not just of spirit. Then I would go out to dinner with people and they'd want to pick up the tab, or I'd want to pick up the tab. There was a reciprocity of humanity there that I saw very little of on the left. So then I started thinking, well, wait a minute. These people who I thought were so mean, Republicans, they only care about money and war and all that sort of factory setting nonsense that so many people grow up with now. I was like, wait, they seem to be nicer and they actually are more tolerant. One side always talks about tolerance, but these guys actually act intolerance, not intolerant. And I thought that that was really interesting. And that, again, then opened up a whole new world to me. And then once that world was opened, it was like a fan opening, basically. And now the fan's getting wider and wider. And now a whole bunch of new people are entering my world. My idea set is widening. And I just kept going down that path. And I guess here we are.
A lot of what you're sharing is with these conversations with people is about having an influence on people. And it's funny, I lived in France for a while and the culture is just a little different. And I can't generalize about the culture in any way, but a lot of my friends there, I found them to want to convince or guilt you. And I just remember thinking like, that's not very influential. Like the lowest way to influence somebody to do something is to coerce them. Like there's no real influence there, right? Or forced, forceful persuasion. How do you, okay, I have so many questions for you, so I will keep this within our time limit, but I guess
I'll try to be quicker.
Yeah, no, please. How do you, when you have a goal of getting across these people, because I'm imagining some of these conversations you've had with people who are on a different side of the political fence than you've seen a light go off for them, or maybe they have changed their mind about something in front of your eyes. What do you think you're doing outside of, is it just facts? Is it delivery? Because, it seemed like there was a receptivity that you experienced that was pretty critical. How do you have an influence on people and get through to people? I know for me, it's storytelling. I'm a powerful storyteller. What's your chosen method?
I mean, I think more than anything else, and all my whole team knows this, for me, it comes through humor, right? Like, so if I'm doing my daily show and we do about an hour a day, if by the end of the show, I'm like, man, today's show was funny. Like, I know it was funny. People watched that show and it was funny. Then I feel like I've done something right. Because look, the clips that I'm going to show of, okay, Joy Behar said this insane thing, and Kamala said this, and Biden can't finish a sentence. And, okay, there's a million YouTube shows or shows online or podcasts that are going to do that. But if I can tell you a story about all of that, and that's how we try to write the show with a real narrative around it, not just story, which very few shows do. That's one part. But the other part is, oh, and you laugh.
Yeah.
So to me, the favorite comment that I get, Dave, I was laughing hysterically at the show today. It's like, oh, hopefully you maybe learned a little bit of something or thought about something a little bit differently, but I did it through humor. I mean, Oscar Wilde said, if you want to tell people the truth, be funny or they'll kill you. And I think that really is it. I would also say my temperament, I run generally kind of cool. It takes a lot to like really get me going. So I think that comes across also. So when I do have these moments on the show, which unfortunately happen a bit more than I like, which is why I take the month off in August, when people see real frustration in me, it's real.
Yeah.
You know, when I'm running out of words to say about the people who keep lying about everything, and then, you know, I throw out the F-bomb or whatever, it's like people appreciate that. But I think more than anything else, you know, I don't think the world is supposed to bow to me. I am not trying to control the world. And when you really understand that, I think one of the problems that a lot of people have right now is they think that because they believe something, and that because they believe it, of course, it's the right thing, that they have the right to make everyone bow to that.
Yeah.
I don't believe that. I want a government and a culture that allows me to live my life and my neighbor can live their life. And as long as we're not, you know, jumping over the fence, attacking each other, then I don't care what my neighbor thinks about things. And that, by the way, is much more in line with the founding principles of the country than virtually anything that we're doing politically today. But because I accept a live and let live attitude and everything else, I think people really are attracted to that. They just don't hear it enough. So nobody really understands. It's why you're probably a little checked out of politics, which I fully get. I get it. People come up to me and say, Dave, every now and again, someone will say to me, Dave, you know, I love listening to your show, but I don't listen as much anymore. But it's not because of you. It's because politics is so awful.
Yeah.
And I'm like, listen, I hope you'll come back. But I get it. Because politics has become the art of basically bludgeoning everyone with the dumbest, dullest tool. And I still think it's important to care about. I think that there are major, major problems in this country that we really do need to worry about and that are not insurmountable.
Yeah.
But to be in it all day, all the time, making everybody go crazy, like I'm just not interested in that.
Yeah, totally. And I think as I get older, I'm definitely facing some of those issues. I think when you're younger and in your 20s, unless you've had the misfortune of like a really challenging health issue or something like that, and you've had to work within systems that are government related, you might not be feeling the blows or the direct impact of the government. I was just telling somebody the other day, I went to get a mammogram because my grandma died really young of breast cancer. And I felt like I needed to beg every single person to get myself through the medical system to get my screening. And obviously there's so much research behind if it's a good idea, if it's not a good idea, all these things. But it is the first time as I'm approaching my 40s where I'm like, oh, I'm experiencing the government. And I worked for the government, you know.
Right.
But
Right.
I am a cog in this wheel and I feel what
Yeah.
it's, you know, like in fact, like when my OBGYN, she gave me a requisition, I called Cedars-Sinai and they're like, well, you know, do you need this mammogram? Are you sure? And I'm like, well, yes, please. And so I get there and then the tech is like, are you sure about this? And I'm like, what is this? So anyway, point being, I understand what you're saying about the responsibility to at least have some awareness. I want to talk a little bit about creative pressure. You are talking about having an hour show where you're creating this story arc. Obviously, you have help on your show. You're not at it alone, which, you know, thankful for people who can meet us in our creativity like that. They are sacred. You know, sometimes I feel like I'm not building a team. I'm building like a dynasty over here at my company. I'm like, this is a freaking dynasty. But how do you navigate that creative pressure? Because what I see all the time, and even with myself, my book, it did decently well in the United States. It took off in Taiwan, in Asia, and it was like a super unicorn bestseller. I have no influence in Asia. And it was so weird for me because I have no influence there. I have no contacts there. I had no promotion there. It just did what it may. And I was like, dang, I need to create another book in the Asian market. Like I need to get another book deal in Asia. And then I was like, well, what do I say? Have I peaked? And so I'm wondering what your mindset is, or how do you keep yourself creating? How do you take care of yourself to stay creative? Because obviously we're not just meant to create. So any curiosity about that?
Well, sure. Well, the one that's on top of mind at the moment is I am literally just off 31 days with no
Yeah.
phone and no TV and no news and really nothing electronic and everything else. This is my 8th year doing this off the grid thing. I did it and I've done it in August. So it's my 8th August doing it. The first year that I did it, it was kind of a joke. I had finally made a little bit of money where I was like, maybe I could just, and I think I only had literally one employee on payroll at the time. So I was like, I could take some time off. She can go do her thing for a little bit and I'll come back and see what happens. And it was wonderful. I mean, there's not even the word for it. It was transformative and incredible. And, you know, for the first 3 days, I keep going into my pocket trying to find my phone. And then you have this weird anxiety, like, oh my God, what am I missing on Twitter? And will everyone forget about me and all that stuff? But each year that I've done it, it's become more and more of an integral piece in what allows me to do that hour-long show every day and allows me to take the hate and the love and all that and not go crazy. Trust me, there are many, many people in my space, plenty of who I've been friendly with or had on my show, who have gone completely insane while doing this, because the fame makes you crazy, the money, the deals, all the political part of it, the bridges that are burned when I supported this guy and you supported, like, there's so many ways, so many avenues to just go nuts, right? Like, you're close enough in age with me, you probably remember like True Hollywood Stories, right?
Yeah.
Like every show had why did the Golden Girls have insane drama on the set? It's just part of it. So basically, I think getting off the grid, letting go of the thing for a month. My husband and I went to Mexico for about 2 weeks. We stayed in a tree house about 200 feet in the air and did nothing other than watch the ocean and go to the beach and go to the spa and work out and eat great food and drink great tequila and nothing. And then for the rest of it, we were home. We have 2 twin 2-year-olds. And for me, he's a full-time dad. So he's in there doing that every day. And it sounds cliche, but being a full-time parent is by far the hardest job in the world. And now for me, usually I have the weekends, obviously, where I'm a full-time dad, but on my work days, like today, I'm in studio most of the day. I can check in with them and everything else, but really till 5, 6 o'clock, I can't do too much with them. So for me to have 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks of my life of August, to be full time with them, basically 24 hours a day, because Luke, he's in like a sleep regression. So I was like sleeping on the floor for a couple nights. And it's like maddening and insane and the most wonderful thing ever and hilarious. And it's all the stuff. You're nodding in obvious agreement. Like, it's all the stuff. And I think, by the way, doing that, even reconnecting to that part of my life, it helps the political part of my life. It helps me do this better. When they talk about kids transitioning or all of these things that they sound like political issues, but when you can connect everything to your family and how you live and everything else, then it becomes something really, really rich. And I think there's probably some other things I could tell you about diet and exercise and that kind of stuff. Yeah. But that really, I think the August thing, particularly this year, and just one other thing on that real quick, because you mentioned having a team behind you, what you called sacred. Yeah. My team right now they are so incredible. And we are friends, and it almost feels like family. I hate when everyone says fam, because we're not family, but we are friends I have everyone over all the time for dinner. We all hang out. My chief of staff got engaged over the break. My producer went to Thailand. One of my other guys went golfing in Scotland. Like, it gives everybody the opportunity to do something really cool. And then when I got back in studio yesterday, and it was the first time I had seen them in a month, like, everyone was over. It was so obvious. They were so happy to be back at work. And how many places can say that? So
exactly. It's a true art
a beautiful
form.
thing.
Yeah. And one thing that came up for me, I was listening to you talk about all your friends that you have, especially ones that people would know listening, that, I don't know if it's growing up in LA that made me like, I don't have starstruck. I don't get starstruck.
Yeah.
The only person I get starstruck from is Little John, because I feel like in high school, I just like listened to that song, Get Low, Boom, Boom.
Oh, doesn't he drank the syrup? He drank some kind of Robitussin.
He has story.
Robitussin
Oh my gosh, Dave, true story. I was hosting this women's dinner in LA. It was like 50 most influential women in LA. I just got a tooth extracted. And the doctor said, I had like stress, my back molar tooth cracked. The doctor said, Ashley, don't miss the medication, because you got to get ahead of the pain. So I didn't really question it, which is a flaw that I've overcome since then, of like really reading the labels. Because I was like, fine, he says to take it, I'm just following the label. But I didn't pay attention to the Tylenol with codeine. And it said only take as needed, take 3, every whatever as needed. I just took it for like 5 days. And I remember like going to get the Uber to this dinner that I'm hosting. And suddenly I was like, what time is it? Where am I? What day is it? And it took me like 2 to 3 minutes. And I called my mom. I'm like, Mom, there was a 2 to 3 minute blip where I didn't know where I was or what day or time. Like, could it be 7?
That's the purple drank. I think
that's I literally showed up hosting this thing, like in the purple drank, like showing up. Welcome to the finest dinner of anyway. Okay, so speaking of your social connections, here's what I'm curious about is I feel like it's such a game, and it's so fulfilling at the same time, is finding your people. And not all people are your people. And there's there's the business networking friends, and then there's like the friends where there's like no agenda. There truly isn't. You're not thinking about anything. How do you navigate choosing people that are truly in your close circle? Because I feel like you're in an interesting little planet over there, Dave.
Yeah, well, one thing that I think has really, really helped me with that is that my two best friends in the world, one of them, my buddy John, I met the first day of kindergarten when we were 4.5 years old. I literally remember meeting him, and he ended up living a block away from me growing up. And now we're 48 years old, so we've been friends for 44 years. He actually just moved down to Florida, just a couple miles away from me. And my other buddy, my buddy Ari, we met, he moved to town when we were in third grade, and we're in a little text group, the three of us. And so the reason I mention that is I had good friends before this. I had good friends before I was famous or whatever you want to say, and I had good friends before I had any money or anything else. John worked in food service for years. And when I was broke doing stand-up, when I literally didn't have $20 to my name, he would drop off industrial size cans of tuna that were supposed to go to restaurants to make, 200 tuna sandwiches. And I would be eating out of that for a week. I kid you not. So I didn't get into this. It's not like I didn't have friends. The fact that I've had these guys with me, if they're ever grounding me and all of that stuff, and challenged me politically and everything else, all of that stuff, and playing video games and sports and blah, blah, blah. So that I think has sort of, I wasn't like, oh my God, now I have all these new people in my life, I need new friends. So the people, the famous people or whatever you want to say that have actually become friends, Jordan Peterson, who's become a friend and a mentor and when I'm with him, I'm like, oh, this is my like long lost uncle. Like it's an incredible, amazing thing. He knows I would never do wrong by him and he would never do wrong by me. Look, I've had other people, names need not be mentioned, who I thought I was very close with and we kind of grew up publicly together that ultimately turned on me or I found out were talking shit against me or some of that kind of stuff. And you just kind of let it go. But what's cool is that every now and again, like it sounds silly to name drop, especially when I'm talking to someone from LA. Yeah. So I won't name drop. But like, for example, like I went to a political event when I still lived in LA. And this woman who's a huge sitcom star, like multiple Emmy time winner, blah, blah, blah. She came up to me and she's going on and on about what a huge fan she is. And I've loved her forever. And I was like, wow, that's so amazing. And then her and her husband came over for dinner next week and we quickly became friends. And it's like, I'm not saying that like, oh my God, I have a friend who's famous, as much as just like, if you do something good and you put something good in the world, you have no idea who might be, that might be resonating with on the other side. And next thing you know, you're at dinner with that person, or I have my favorite basketball player of all time's phone number in my phone and we text every now and again, and all the weird things that might happen that you could never have imagined those things happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I know in the spiritual kind of like personal development space, they talk a lot about, feminine energy, masculine energy being kind of gender agnostic, but being this thing where it's like receptivity versus pursuit. And I feel like the cool thing about when you've done a lot of pursuit, you've put a lot out there, is you put yourself in this mode of receptivity all the time, where it's like you put something out there so big. Like I remember when my TEDx talk got like, 10 million views or whatever, and hit the top 100 on the TED channel, it was like, wow, there's so many opportunities that are just coming to find me. I just did this 19-minute speech and so many people keep finding me over and over and over, and it creates this mysticism in your career. And so I think moments like that, it's like you're being met by people who see you and you've been willing to be seen. Before we go, what would be your final words for anybody who's listening? They're seeing you live your big life. They're seeing you be unafraid, navigate the trolls with who cares mentality in the best way possible.
Yeah.
And have awesome friends. And they're thinking, man, I just want to live so much better. Like, what would be the best wisdom you could impart, or the best wisdom you've ever gotten that you think about all the time?
Well, look, as we mentioned briefly before, I spent 1.5 years on tour with Jordan Peterson. And Jordan, he wrote 12 Rules for Life. And then the follow-up book to that. When we were on tour, I saw this guy do the most amazing things that are like humanly imaginable. Like if you believe that prophets existed at one time, he's as close, I think, and I don't say this in the bowing sense. I say this in just the most like literal sense that I could mean it as a human, that he is as close to a modern prophet as we could have. I saw literally every night thousands of people show up to auditoriums who had given up drugs because of listening to him about, you know, clean your room before you clean the world and stand up straight with your shoulders back. And, you know, all of we could go into all 12 rules. I know them backwards, forwards, and every which way. But by giving people the tools to think about their lives seriously, the relationships that were mended, the story that I love to tell the most about being on tour with Jordan, and it gives me, I will get chills up my spine when I tell it to you, and I bet you will get them too. Every time I tell it, I still get chills up my spine. We were about halfway through the tour. We were in Dublin, Ireland, and we were doing a show probably about 5,000 people. And I think the night before we were in Amsterdam, the next night we were going to Norway or something. You know, every night we were literally waking up in different countries. More than one occasion, I got the city wrong on stage, which is always, you know, I was in Edmonton. I said we were in Calgary, like they boo you, and then there's laughs with it. But it was like just helter-skelter, media everywhere, jet lag. Also, he was in the midst of some health stuff that he started doing carnivore diet. So there was an exhaustion level and everything else. All day in Dublin, does all these media hits, does the show, does the meet and greet. Now it's 1 a.m., right? Long day. I'm utterly exhausted. And he does an hour and a half by himself. I was just opening and closing the show with him. And I'm 12 or 14 years younger than him too. End of the show, you know this, when you do a show at a theater, you obviously, as the performer, you don't walk out the main entrance because there's going to be a lot of people waiting for you. There's usually an artist entrance. And ironically, it's always I always think this is funny. It's usually like in this dark alley where anyone could be waiting for you, like, you know, like Bruce Wayne's parents in Batman. Anyway, we open up the door. It's like 1 a.m. and it's me and Jordan and his wife. And we didn't even have security at the time. It was just the tour manager. That's it. And about 50 yards away from us, it's a dark alley, but there's a light and we see two guys. And we can't quite hear them, but it seems like they're arguing or something, like there's like a ruckus. And then they start both kind of trotting towards us, like not full speed, but coming at us. And we were like, oh man, like, are they going to attack us? And then as we could suddenly see them, we see that they've both been crying, hysterically crying. And it's a man, the man was probably about 60 years old, and the younger guy was about 25 years old. And they tell us that they are a father and son who had had a falling out about 5 years before, had not seen each other in 5 years, both read Jordan's book, and then independently of each other came to the show to see Jordan, saw each other at the show, made amends afterward. I just got the chill up my spine again, as many times as I've told you this. And tell us that hysterical crying. Jordan begins to cry. His wife begins to cry. John, the tour manager, begins to cry. I teared up a little bit. It's a little harder to get me to cry. But that thing, so to answer your question, what I've seen Jordan do is put something that is true into the world. And by putting something true into the world, you have no idea how much you can fix the world. And I have tried to do that to the best of my ability. And I think I sit here at this moment, you know, right off this 31-day thing, like probably in the most like sound, physical, mental, spiritual condition that I've ever been in, or at least as an adult ever been in. And the challenge is to keep that going. And I think the way you do that is through some of the things that you just talked about. You got to have the right friends around you. You got to not get drunk on the fame or the other parts of it, and keep talking about it in an honest way, because then you can map your reality against someone else's reality. And that's what actually, I think, defines reality. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You have such an ecosystem. Where would you suggest people listening to you who are resonating with your voice, they want to get more of you? Where's the best place they should start?
Well, if they just want to start, then obviously the easiest place, of course, is YouTube. I did create locals.com, and we have our community on Locals, which you pay a couple bucks a month. And that's where you get some insider stuff and more personal stuff and the rest of it. And that got us away a little bit from the big tech thing. But youtube.com/Rubin Report, or eventually, as you mentioned at the top, Locals, we ended up merging with Rumble, which became a huge, that and ended up becoming a huge financial success, which changed my life. So it's RubinReport.locals.com. Or rumble.com/Rubin Report. It's Rubin Report everywhere, basically.
And we'll put in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. It was my pleasure. And you left Florida to go to LA, which is so insane that I'm going to have to think on this and get back to you.
I know. I'm born and raised here. What do you say? Home is home. But next time I'm in Florida, I hope I find you amongst.
Yeah, come on down. Come on down
yeah.
to Miami. I make a
Yes.
fine tomahawk steak. And do you like tequila?
Oh my gosh, I freaking love steak and I love tequila.
I have my tequila is coming out probably next month. We've been working on it for about a year and a half, I think next month. So we'll drink some tequila.
Awesome. Thanks for tuning in to the U-Turn podcast. I hope you learned so much in this episode and you're putting it into action today. We would love to hear from you. Slide into my DMs at Ashley Stahl or leave a written review if you're inspired. It would mean so much to us. Be sure to subscribe to the show because, as you know, the more subscribers we get, the better the guests we can bring you. And in the meantime, if you're looking to skyrocket your personal brand and impact millions, head on over to wisewhisperagency.com to learn more about how we are getting clients booked for the TEDx stage.